All right, I think we can go ahead since we are waiting the participants to joining us to our latest edition of Agri-Food Connect. So we have Kirsten with us today from New Fork. Thank you for joining us today, Kirsten. Thank you so much. So since people are joining in, I'll just go over with really in short what is Kök Projekt and what is Agri-Food Connect, and then we'll kick off with diving in with the blockchain technologies in agri-food sector. So in short, as I mentioned, this is going to be a repeat for a lot of people who are joining us previously. But I would like to do it for the first time, for people who heard of us, first time, to share what we are working on as well. So we are Kök Projekt. In a traditional sense, we are an accelerator and a corporate innovation partner for the agri-food sector companies. We only work for the startups of the agriculture, food, and water sector. What we do is that we cover each part of the food value chain, from the seed to the table, or in the latest sense, from the seed to the shelf. And we develop acceleration programs accordingly. And our headquarters based in Istanbul, but we have local partners all across the world. And with the new normal, we are adapting ourselves to develop such programs. One of the programs, as I mentioned, with the new normal, since we are, gearing towards to the new normal with the agri-food sector, the new food sector, new agriculture, new food experiences, new CPGs and all that, we decided, why don't we create a global conversation around agri-food sector and involving all of these, really valuable partners to share their insight and the latest updates in their own ecosystem. So the program itself, the Agri-Food Connect, as I mentioned, is a global conversation around agri-food sector. It's about adaptations, challenges, opportunities, and what the crisis will bring us regards the agri-food sector. So the program itself contains a series of webinars, such as like this, and then we're going to move into organizing an online sprints where we provide opportunities for startups to work together with the corporates and develop solutions and products to be adapted directly in their value chain. The next step will be an agile mentorship program. We will be selecting the top performing startups to work closely with them, to helping them adapt their products and solutions directly into those companies' value chain and help them grow. And in the last phase of it, we will be working together with them on a pre-acceleration program, focusing on their marketing strategies, growth strategies, and basically create the adaptation system for startups to adapt to the new norm. So that's Agri-Food Connect. If you would like to know more about, Agri-Food Connect, Kök Projekt, or other stuff we do, you can just log into our website, which is kökprojekt.com. You can register to our newsletter, and also you can join into our Slack group, which is Kök Community, which has representatives all across the, the startups, agri-food sector, and also the great ecosystem players which you can connect and have a conversation with. So that comes to today's topic, so Agri-Food Connect. As I mentioned, we have Kirsten Kopolse. I hope I pronounced it correctly. We have Kirsten.
Sorry, yeah.
Awesome. So we have Kirsten with us. She is the CEO of New Fork, which she will be explaining us, what is New Fork and what are you guys working on. And I would like to, pass the mic to you, Kirsten, to basically share us, what are you working on and what is your experience with the agri-food sector and the blockchain itself. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, thank you for having me. So indeed, my name is Kirsten Kopolse and I'm COO of New Fork. And at New Fork, we bring blockchain to the agri-food sector. And blockchain, of course, is a fairly new technology. And we help agri-food companies and consortia with implementing the technology. And we do that in multiple ways. Of course, education is very important when adapting a new technology like blockchain. So that's, for example, training, so in the form of master classes, it's consulting. We have consulting packages called the Strike 2 Lab that really helps with all the aspects of integration of new technology. But we also do specific consulting, for example, aimed at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And on the other hand, we also implement blockchain. So we create blockchain designs, and together with tech partners, we implement those designs with companies. So that's in a nutshell what we do.
Excellent, excellent. I would like to, start off with dive in with the ecosystem in Netherlands. So you guys are based in Netherlands, and you are a Dutch organization as well. Can you tell us a bit more about us? You know, the differences of the Dutch ecosystem when it comes to the agri-food and the blockchain as well.
Yes. Yeah, we as New Fork are based in Amsterdam, and I think for the Netherlands, Amsterdam is the blockchain hub. Although some companies based in, for example, The Hague might not agree, or in Rotterdam. I think in the Netherlands for blockchain, almost every city now has a blockchain lab, and we, as the New Fork, are also moving forward with developing a blockchain lab in Amsterdam. So that's really nice because that facilitates working together for bigger projects on this new technology. And of course, the Netherlands is known as an agri-food country. We have Wageningen University that probably everybody attending here might have heard of, and maybe not so known for people outside of the Netherlands. The Netherlands is actually the second largest food exporter in the world after the United States, which is of course much bigger than the Netherlands. So indeed, we face some of the challenges I think that other countries are currently facing in the situation as it is now. But some other challenges, for example, indeed, the availability of food is less pressing here. So that brings, I think, the Netherlands in a unique position.
Excellent.
Yeah, and maybe adding to that, actually, of course, there's also lots of innovation in food and agri-food tech going on in the Netherlands. And
Yeah.
some of that is indeed centered around Wageningen and Wageningen University. There are quite some commercial spin-offs going on. And then, of course, the focus is a bit on the food side of things, but also from the tech side of things, of course, there is developments. So, for example, we are based in the Startup Village in Amsterdam, and there's also companies working with AI, for example, which is also, of course, promising technology for the food sector.
Excellent, excellent. So I would like to start off, dissecting the adaptations of the blockchain with the agri-food value chain, and there are, several steps to be covered. And one of the, the great conversation points is that how do you actually adapt, blockchain systems to directly to a corporate value chain? Can you tell us a bit, in detail, like how does the process works, and what kind of a design that the new forks work on developing such systems?
Yes. So at the new fork, we like to take the client through the whole process. So with most clients, we like to do something we call the Strike 2 Lab, which you can find on our website. Our website is thenewfork.com, so that's actually very easy. And the Strike 2 Lab is a couple of sessions where we sit together with the decision makers within the company, and we define multiple things there. So indeed, we define the challenges that the company is facing, and we present new technologies like blockchain, but also adjacent technologies that can help with blockchain. So think, for example, about IoT, where you can use sensor data to directly connect into blockchain to get great data input for your blockchain. And indeed, from that, we work on creating an MVP and a design. And after all these sessions, you have a design that you can move forward with to implement. So indeed, we like to go through the whole process and indeed really focus on what are the challenges and what new technologies can be solutions there. And often that's blockchain, but it can also be that other technologies might be a better fit. Yeah, for implementing blockchain, I think the main question is, do you have a problem of trust?
Right.
And in lots of supply chains, that is the case, of course. But you implement blockchain to create one single truth, so that your network is one shared truth. So if somebody enters some data, it won't be changed somewhere retroactively. Those data will be shared through the whole network and will be unchangeable.
I understand. Excellent. I would like to actually move a bit further on that. So, for example, one of the great conversation points is to, when we're talking about agriculture as a sector and the impact of it economically to a country's economy as well. As you mentioned, the case for Netherlands, it is one of the the second the biggest importer in the world after US, which is a massive statistic. But how do you see the an overall integration with the blockchain? Do you think is it possible to integrate blockchain solutions to all of the sections within the agriculture, and would that affect the economic, income that, that would bring with the agriculture and the quality of the ingredients itself?
Well, of course, blockchain is not a cure-all system. So you really have to think about why do you want to improve your supply chain? And we see three main reasons to do that in agri-food, namely optimizing. So, for example, the better planning of your supply chain, saving costs. Well, you can imagine, I think, some cases there. Another one is transparency, and then you're talking about reducing risks. So, for example, easy targeted recalls, monitoring of allergens, those kinds of things. And the other one is sustainability, and then you're talking about social sustainability and circularity and making claims to your consumer. So you want to have a reason in mind before implementing your blockchain solution. And of course, you're not going to do that by yourself as a company. You need to have your supply chain with you to do that. So, for example, some of the cases, a nice case from the Netherlands is Moyi Coffee, focus on indeed creating a claim to the consumer. And what they do is they show that the farmers in, I think in their case, it's Ethiopia, received a fair income, a fair price for their coffee, and that 50% of the value stays in the country of origin. And I think such a thing, then blockchain really is a contribution, because you can immutable show some information to your end consumer that then might buy your product instead of the competitor that is not as transparent. But you really need to have a goal in mind and information that you really want to communicate with either your supply chain or your consumer with blockchain.
I understand. How do you see the effects of it because you mentioned, sustainability, and it's also, one of the crucial points when we start talking about, like, food safety, food sovereignty, food security. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, like all roads lead to Rome, and all of these topics lead to blockchain in some sort, not maybe directly as 100%, but indirectly as well.
Yeah.
That's definitely the case for the food safety, for sure, right? I mean, when you're talking about, quality sourcing, but also the streamlining the production and the whole value chain. I would like to, talk about that part as well, but I wanted to add this section as well. How is the, for example, the Dutch government's, perspective on adapting all of these technologies as well? Is it also, supported, or is it rather just, focused on, digitalization rather than the blockchain? How is the perspective in Netherlands on this as well?
Yeah, well, of course, indeed, for the consumer, food safety, of course, is the first and most pressing concern. And when that's in place, you can look indeed at food quality. And after that, you can look at sustainability. So indeed, things like circularity. And I think our government also has that in mind. And actually, circularity is in the agenda for the Dutch government. I don't think they really made a link to how technology can contribute. I think that's something they're currently working on. But indeed, digitalization is also quite high on the agenda. But on the other hand, moving away from agri-foods, and of course, blockchain sometimes is also hindered by regulations. A regulation that all people within the EU might be familiar with is GDPR. And of course, currently GDPR and blockchain are, it's a bit vague, I think, if blockchain is compliant with GDPR or not. Some people say it would be, but other people say that even if consumer information is hashed, so if you have encryption of consumer information, and it's still not GDPR compliant, because of course the whole point with blockchain is that information is immutable. So you can't just retract information. So that's of course something that maybe the letter of the law and the intent of the law kind of don't agree here. And that's of course because blockchain is fairly new technology. So the legislator never thought about blockchain, I think, when creating GDPR laws. So that's of course something that companies might bump into.
Exactly. I mean, I guess we're still in the phase of sort of like 80s for the agri-food technologies, right? I mean, it's still up and coming. It's just developing as we speak. And with the crisis in hand, like with the global pandemic and the new normal, is creating a better opportunities for all of these technologies to be adapted in a longer scale. So on the matters of, if we move back to the food security and food safety, how do you see that affect with the blockchain? Do you think blockchain is a solution on this as well, or is it more, you know, focused on regarding the trust?
Yeah, definitely, I think. And of course, here in the Netherlands, we're quite, I think, quite spoiled talking about food safety and food quality, I think. But definitely food safety, of course, there is checks and certification and all kinds of things in place to guarantee a sufficient level of food safety. Although, of course, also scandals happen. You can, of course, think about the fipronil recently. But I think Asia, for example, is quite a bit farther along with adoption. For example, scannable QR codes are already, I think, much more in place there, and they work together very nicely with blockchain solutions. And an example, of course, could be, for example, baby milk. That's, of course, something that was a problem with, and that made people, of course, a bit suspicious there. Because if you have the food scandals that actually kill people, then of course companies would do a lot to avoid those kinds of things happening again. And consumers are, of course, also wary.
Absolutely. One of the great cases with this, I remember, is I mean, in Turkey, and which is funny enough, it's also a similar case in the US as well, between, I think, 3 or 4 year difference. The food poisoning that is caused by the spinach. I think this was
Oh yeah,
in the US, that, you know, triggered Walmart to work together with if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, with IBM, to integrate
yeah, they
the
do.
solutions to understand how they can actually tackle, you know, food poisoning or any of the, you know, the problems they would have. Which is funny enough, we had a similar issue last October, sorry, in September, last September, again with the spinach. I think spinach, when it comes to this situation, is just the usual suspect. But again, also, like, how do you, you know, see the effects on the quality of ingredients as well? So we're talking about sourcing, we're talking about tracing. Do you think this will also affect the value chain efficiency, and this will, you know, ultimately change the quality of ingredients? Would that be something of a you know, value proposition for blockchain as well?
Definitely, but of course, with blockchain, as with everything else in the food sector, things are driven by consumer demand. So indeed, if there's a consumer demand for better quality ingredients, then of course, blockchain can help prove claims that ingredients are indeed what they claim to be. So for example, there is currently much more Italian olive oil in existence than could ever come out of Italy. Of course, blockchain can, of course, help create the claim that the olive oil is actually coming out of the area that it's claiming to be come out, and therefore that's certain quality. So that's certainly something that's possible. And speaking of sustainability, those tie in very nicely, of course, because a huge problem I think that companies and organizations are now working on are things like palm oil and soy. And
Right.
actually, it's here also very high on the political agenda, the EMVO Bankenconvenant. So for the conference for the banks is actually focusing on palm oil and indeed how to improve here. And I think blockchain could be a tool to monitor, of course, indeed where palm oil is coming from and under what circumstances it's obtained.
Excellent. I wanted to move a bit towards to the producer side as well. One of the great questions like that always comes up is that when we talk about, you know, digitalization of, you know, agriculture value chain, the fruit production, etc. This question always comes up as saying, how do you actually convince the producers? Producers as the profile, as the persona always changes in each country and each ecosystem, of course, but it's always the case that how are we going to convince the producers to be able to provide all of these information, either manually or not manually, etc. So regards the Netherlands, regards the Dutch agri-food, you know, ecosystem on agri-food, is there any examples that you would like to give? Like, how does these, you know, companies or governments are convincing the producers to provide all of these informations openly, and can that be adapted to the other, you know, countries all across the world?
Yeah, I think here in the Netherlands, producers don't necessarily need that much prompting. So if you're talking about farmers and other agri-entrepreneurs, I think some of them are actually already quite tech savvy. So for example, in the southern Netherlands, we have a farmer that is now an airport because he was busy with drones and doing all kinds of things. And in order to keep doing that, he had to become an airport. So he's now an airport. So that's really cool, I think. And of course, farmers here in the Netherlands actually already have lots of systems in place because they often have different retailers that take their end products, and therefore they have to have different administrations for all of them. They could have 3 administrations, maybe even more. And
Right.
of course, blockchain can help, of course, with making it a lot easier there. And even outside the Netherlands, we see that producers are sometimes quite interested actually in adopting blockchain. So we at the New Fork have a meetup group called the Food Integrity Blockchain Meetup. And for a year, we with the meetup group, we gathered the wisdom of the crowd to help a startup called Agri-Unity.
Right.
And this Australia-based startup is working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to provide simple smartphones to farmers in developing countries, so they can function like a digital cooperative on the blockchain. So they farmers together with the cooperative, so the physical cooperative, verify what the farmer produced and indeed that he got a fair price for that, and so on and so forth. And those farmers, according to Agri-Unity, are actually really happy to work with blockchain because I think the solution could be possible in some way without blockchain, but according to Agri-Unity, the farmers are really pressing for blockchain there. So that's quite cool to hear that there is lots of interest worldwide actually for implementing blockchain.
That's
Yeah, I think it's the immutable and the shared truth part that really speaks to many people in the supply chain.
that's excellent to hear, and that's also the case when you're talking about examples, right? I mean, for example, one of the great value propositions is to say if you integrate these solutions, you might end up making more profit compared to last year or 5 years before. With the efficiency that this can be provided, you would have more yield with your production and etc. And we can track this production so that we can understand the quality of your ingredients. And as you mentioned, I think the Italian olive oil is a great example. It's impossible to have that much Italian olive oil. Italy doesn't produce that much, doesn't export that much, but it exists, and it's one of the conversation points. And I wanted to move in regards this is sort of like a question of products. So, for example, when we're talking about digitalization and the blockchain, do you think is there any sort of like a value chain could be impossible to do so? So, for example, would it be quite applicable for olives and let's say cheese and milk, but it would be hard for meat, etc.? Or is it just like it's quite openly can be adapted any sort of like an agri-food product? I'm asking this because it's one of the questions that when we explain what is blockchain, is like, okay, so what's the benefit, like that comes with that question. So it would be great if you can just share your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I think currently many of the blockchain solutions in agri-food that you see out there are focused on a single product. So you're talking, for example, about orange juice created from oranges, tracking it from orange to supermarkets. Or you're talking about, for example, tilapia, so fish. And of course, it's quite a simple product. So currently, we don't see that many complicated products yet, where you indeed cookies, where you measure the palm oil and the sugar and the milk and all the other ingredients going into the cookie. That doesn't mean that it's not possible. It just means that it's harder. That it's not, of course, if a company is going to dip their toe into the blockchain pool, they might focus on one thing first. And afterwards maybe branch out. And of course, if that's something you would like to do in the future, so indeed the cookie example, then you have to think very carefully about interoperability. So how can different blockchains work together? So you don't have a problem that different blockchains don't talk to each other. So you get the example with the farmers with the different organization of the different administrations, but then the blockchain version of that. And a problem problem might be a bit of an overstatement, but something you see right now is that many of the blockchain solutions are private blockchains. So of course, companies are maybe a bit hesitant to go for public blockchains. I think maybe private blockchains means private is privacy,
Right.
and like to keep some sort of control. Well, of course, in public blockchains, that the code of the blockchain is public means also that there's more developers working on it, and therefore that it's easier to make interoperable blockchains that could work for the combined code products like the cookies I was just dreaming up here.
Right, right. I understand. Excellent. I think one of the the great questions on this, as you mentioned, the privacy, right? Like, should that be, an information should be private for all of these companies to showcase when they prefer to, or should it be available, in public? And I think that's one of the interesting points, because when we're talking about like retail, retail companies are slowly adapting blockchain into their value chain, compared to the other companies, as I understand, because they want to showcase that these are the products that we know exactly where they're coming from. I think like Migros, in Switzerland, Walmart in the US, and several other examples could be great on that. But also that brings the conversation of like how can be translated for entrepreneurs, like how the entrepreneurs can actually build such products, or just build solutions to be applied within a blockchainized value chain. So how do you see that connection with it? So should blockchain technologies would be available for like big companies to adapt directly in their value chain, or should it be more does it have any like open spaces for entrepreneurs to come in and adapt more solutions in this, at least in today's systems, as you can see?
Yeah, I think let's first dive into your point of privacy, I think, before we get to that. I think we briefly spoke about hashing already. So that you have shared immutable data within the whole network doesn't necessarily mean that everybody can see data. So
Right.
within hash, people can see that there is a shared data system and that it's not changed. So that nobody changed the numbers around, but they don't see what the numbers actually are. They just see a string of imaginary numbers, and they see that they don't change. So it's not necessarily that if you have a blockchain for example, maybe prices, that your competition can see the prices you paid.
Exactly.
Of course, if you want to make claims to your consumer that you pay a fair market price, it would be good to indeed upload invoices to show that you create a fair market price. Then you're not going to get there with hashing your information. But that's indeed the point on privacy. The point on if blockchain would be open to entrepreneurs. Yeah, of course, blockchain is a fairly new technology.
Right.
So many of the companies working on blockchain are indeed startups or scale-ups, although you did indeed also mentioned IBM that is very active in blockchain for food, and it's definitely not a startup or a scale-up. So many of the companies we like to work with on the technology are indeed also startups or scale-ups. And for the agri-food companies implementing blockchain, well, often blockchain in agri-food is blockchain for a supply chain. You can think of some other solutions, for example, with a self-sovereign identity. So then you're going more to a blockchain where you want to know about consumer preferences and consumers sharing information with you through a self-sovereign identity. So more of a loyalty program that can, of course, be implemented by, for example, a retailer without all of the supply chain contributing. But in most cases, you're talking about at least part of the supply chain that you would like to work with you on the blockchain. So it wouldn't be just one company implementing a blockchain. So if you're very interested in blockchain developments, you might have picked up on the Maersk IBM case. They created a blockchain solution for shipping, and they actually wanted other companies to join that. But because of the governance, there was some hesitation to join. Right. Because of course companies don't want to join a system that they feel is owned by another company. And speaking on indeed entrepreneurs, maybe smaller entrepreneurs establishing blockchain, well, I briefly spoke about Moyi Coffee. That's actually an example of a not too big brand. We within a new fork describe as a cool brand. So a company that really uses blockchain as a USP, for example, to indeed make a claim to consumers. Another one of those that I can mention is also a Dutch one based in the south of the Netherlands called Right Origins, and they do something similar with chocolate. So they have chocolate from India, and they also prove that the circumstances of the chocolate production are nice and friendly.
Right, right. Excellent. I want to actually, would love to have your ideas regarding this topic. So one of the things that just like excites me quite a bit when we talk about, blockchain and agri-food sector is that the commodity markets. So how can we foresee a commodity market in the future, and blockchainized and digitalized agriculture value chain, and that would create a nouvelle commodity market where we can talk about maybe products could be represented as coins, and you can invest on them, and you can follow up with that all of the production and based on a year, and that would be a value, etc. Would you like to share your thoughts on this? Like, is it something exciting as well, or is it something that you don't see a future in?
Definitely, but indeed we're looking into the future. So it's some of it is a bit predictions, of course. Well, first of all, of course, commodity markets in the food sector. So currently, for example, cocoa and coffee and stuff are all a bit intransparent. And then you're touching upon one of the challenges, I think, with blockchain, namely the physical and digital disconnect. As in, how do you prove that physical product is that digital twin on the blockchain? And of course, there are solutions to do that. So, for example, working with IoT and measuring things on a batch level, so sealed containers going from point A to point B. But that's, of course, not how commodity markets in those goods that I just mentioned currently work. It's all kinds of things going into the big heap. And then, of course, it's very hard to track them back to farm level or refinery level, or so that's something, of course, that would require more than just the implementation of blockchain, but indeed also the transformation of the system. What is really cool about blockchain, of course, is that it would make new business models possible. So, for example, something we're now working on, and then I have to take a step back to explain, I think, is the monetization of carbon sequestration by farmers. So we at the New Fork established an, well, let's call it a movement called Strike 2. And in 2019 and beginning of 2020, we had 3 conventions focused on different aspects of new technology in agri-food, with a heavy emphasis on blockchain, and how it can be used to work on existing problems out there. So at the first event, we focused on consumer trust, so indeed food safety, food quality, circularity. On the second event, we focused on farm income, and the third event on the chain management. And in farm income, we focused on the problem of making extra income available to farmers while also giving an impulse for sustainability. So with good farming practices, farmers actually put carbon back into the soil, so helping the environment. And that's something they currently do for free, because the big carbon markets are not accessible for farmers. And blockchain can, of course, help with creating a system there that, for example, blockchain can be used to reward farmers for the work by creating carbon offsets. So that's something that we're currently looking into with a couple of partners, which is an idea of a new business model made possible with blockchain. Something else I think that came out of Strike 2 as well is blockchain for financing. That's also quite cool. We work with a partner called the Sharing Council, and they are currently working with Dutch farmers around Amsterdam to finance a milk factory. So it's in some way it's similar to crowdfunding, but instead of just, well, sometimes I think with crowdfunding it's harder. What do you promise people for what you try to collect? And here you can have people participate in your company with blockchain. So you can give out shares to, for example, your neighbors that rather have a milk factory next door than, I don't know, a convention center. And maybe your mom wants some shares, or some people on Facebook that think, oh, it's quite cool to be part of this. So that's the way I think that blockchain makes this possible.
It is really exciting. I mean, when you take it down to the level of the consumer and being involved in the product itself, I think it's really exciting because, you know, one of the topics, as you mentioned, this is a developing technology. We're still, you know, learning and learning as we go, and, you know, looking to more opportunities to adapt similar technologies. But when you take it into a level of, you know, such way, and talking about, oh yeah, I want to invest olives this year, and this is how I do, and I know this is going to be in this way, etc. So this is quite exciting. You also touch point with circularity quite a lot when you know, answering all of these questions, and I would love to, you know, hear your thoughts with how is the relationship with the, you know, circular economy and blockchain. And it would be great if we can also talk about really briefly what is circular economy for our, you know, attendees and participants who not, you know, never heard of that term, or, you know.
Yeah. Well, currently, I think the Netherlands is really investing in circular economy, and Amsterdam actually is focusing on going the whole donut economics thing. So that's a book by Kate Roberts that is describing a new type of economic model that indeed focuses not only on the straight line, I think, from producer to consumer, but also what happens after. And I think that's still quite hard to implement with blockchain. It's not impossible, but currently I think many blockchain solutions stop at consumer level. So they might communicate information to the consumer. Maybe they go a step further and allow the consumer, for example, to send a picture of himself to the farmer, or give a tip to the farmer or something like that, but not monitor what happens to the product afterwards. So indeed, is the consumer eating it, or is he or she wasting it, and what happens to the waste?
Right.
Of course, that's something that could be possible, but then of course you're touching upon privacy. So
Right.
is the consumer willing to share, I don't know, the contents of his trash can with a whole blockchain system, and is he or she afraid to be penalized on that? So I think going fully circular is a big step, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What of course is a different type of circularity that we actually create a click-to prototype for is more circular production. So currently, and then you're also talking about more local production. So currently, the grain grown in the Netherlands is actually not for bread. It's, for example, for cookies. So the grain for Dutch bread is important for example, from the Ukraine, the breadbasket of Europe. So blockchain could make possible by informing, I think, consumers that it is a possibility that local grain is grown, and that indeed a farmer gets the funding to do so, that he's close to the factory, that it can be refined there, that they can easily share all kinds of information. So indeed on quality, on harvesting times, and all those things. So the factory can use it to create better breads,
Right.
and then indeed they can present it to the consumer. But then, of course, the budget needs to be there to implement and to indeed justify a bit of a higher price, because of course it's not an accident that many blockchain solutions are, for example, centered around products like coffee, because those are a bit more luxury products that people are willing to pay maybe a bit more if they think they are making a positive contribution to, for example, better welfare of the people producing the coffee.
Of course. I think that's one of the cases with the mangoes as well, with the US, and trying to figure out like what is the source of each mango? Is it a desi
Yeah.
mango? Is it not a desi mango? Where did it come from? Where it's been produced, etc. Exactly. But also, I mean, that's also one of the great perspectives, because you are, you know, touching base with food sovereignty as well, and with the crisis is one of the great topics that is, you know, has been, you know, as part of the conversation now for the last 3 months, and how can we, you know, produce more quality ingredients that can be sold into the national market rather than the international market. So that would mean, you know, the blockchain, we covered, you know, food safety, food security, food sovereignty, quality, traceability, so all in one almost. And but the hard part is to integrate it overall. And we're talking about, you know, with the circular economy, it would help it with the production side, but the consumer side still up for the question.
Yeah.
So that would mean we're still, you know, developing and understand, and that's also the great case for entrepreneurs to come up with new solutions and products to understand, is it possible. So I took the long road to ask this question, but do you think blockchain would also have a positive effect on food waste as well, since that's one of the major topics that we are, trying to conquer, if I may, with the SDGs? Do you think it will have an effect on that as well?
Yeah, I think it could, and I think it could go hand in hand there with AI, because I think AI can do great things for food waste as well. So there's a company that used to be neighbors in Startup Village called Rectipricer, and they do AI for pricing. So they make flexible pricing. So here in the Netherlands, if you go to the supermarket, you sometimes see discount stickers on produce that would be nearly thrown out. Well, you can of course do a more sophisticated system if you do digital pricing and indeed AI to make sure that at least as product as possible is thrown out. But you can also use AI for predictions. And also if you, for example, in restaurants or in supermarkets look at the waste, then you can also use that to do further predictions. And of course, blockchain could go hand in hand there with communicating that information and make sure that indeed the network is aware, optimizing the supply chain. And if you have a better optimized supply chain and a better sharing of information, you can of course prevent food waste by, for example, having your produce rot away at a certain point because it's not needed further on in the supply chain.
Right.
So indeed, currently, I think we talk to lots of farmers that are not happy about information going mainly one side in the supply chain, as in they feel that they have to provide lots of information and get not as much in return. And of course, if you have shared information within the network, then it would be easier to, in all parts of the supply chain, act on that and make sure that you need as little food is wasted as possible.
Excellent. It's just the solution for all, as I understand, right?
Yeah.
But it also takes time to, whole world and the agri-food sector to understand how this can be actually adapted. And it's also one of the cases that's still, it's a trend topic, but in the meantime, no one really knows why it's a trend topic. We're trying to figure out like how we can adapt this and being part of that conversation. That covers my questions. I wanted to just really quickly ask the audience, just to, that if they have any questions, and then I have one more question that I would like to ask to you. So any of the people, any of you guys, joining us today, if you want to ask any questions regarding the the blockchain integration or agri-food sector, you can shoot it in the chat section or the Q&A section. So in the meantime, I wanted to, come back and also, touch base with the, this is the first, sorry, I think my connection has a problem. You can hear me now, right? Kirsten?
Yeah, I can follow you, but indeed I'm still here, but there was a bit of lagging or something.
Okay. Yeah, you just had a problem with that. I wanted to just ask you as the examples of the, we talked about a lot of, integrations, and is there any examples that, you wanted to give out as the startups? You mentioned a couple, but is there anyone that you would like to, give as examples for that, to follow up in their works and understand and take as an inspiration? Could be based in Netherlands or could be based anywhere you would like to.
Yeah, I think I already did quite a lot of secret name dropping. And I think for some more name dropping, you could also visit our website because we have under projects, we have listed a couple of companies, many of those startups and scale-ups that we like to work with. So those are all blockchain companies in one way or another. I think a really cool blockchain company that we like to work with, which is actually based in Switzerland and not the Netherlands, is Scantrust. And Scantrust has scannable QR codes that are immutable. So it's a way of sharing information and overcoming the physical digital disconnect. So if you have, for example, a container with that QR code on it, you know that that container is the one that's corresponding to the blockchain. Because if you copy that QR code and paste it on something else, it doesn't scan anymore.
Right.
So you know that it's been tampered with and it's not a container and then QR code. So I think that's a really cool way of using QR codes and blockchain technology to overcome the physical digital disconnects. You now seem a bit frozen. No, I'm looking again. That's good. Yeah, and let me think about some other examples. Yeah, I think A way that we didn't touch upon how blockchain can be used internally within bigger companies is for financing. So, for example, on our meetup that I briefly named before, we had Philips presenting. So Philips is not an agri-food company; they're more on electronics, medical devices, and stuff like that. But they explained how they use blockchain for hedging, because of course they're in multiple countries, so how they use it to balance their ledgers and save them quite a lot of money. We are working with a cool company called Unchain, and they do something similar for our Dutch airlines. So that's also something I think that blockchain can help with, and indeed it's optimizing and saving costs, saving overheads. So that's also something quite cool, I think.
Excellent, excellent. I mean, airlines and blockchain and food waste is just like top 3 topics that I would, I'm looking, with excitement, because the massive food waste that the airlines create, and these technologies and AI would be adapted to this, could be, compared as a minor, but it's actually massive food waste and costs a lot to the airlines, and they can actually cut costs with that. So, I mean, thank you so much for answering all of my questions. Before we go, is there anything you would like to add as a sign off? Any work that we can follow of the new fork, or any of the exciting stuff coming up that you are working on? You would like to share that as a sign off?
Yeah, we are working on lots of exciting stuff, of course. One of those things I briefly mentioned before is the blockchain masterclass. June 25 and 26, we have our next masterclass, and if you're interested in that, look at their website, newfork.com, and you can find some more information. So if you want to learn more about blockchain for agri-food, I think that's where to go.
Excellent. Excellent. Awesome. So that's it for today. So thank you so much for joining us, Kirsten, today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, it was definitely my pleasure. So thank you so much for everyone who joining us today, and also watching in YouTube as well. This recording that we have, with this session that we have with Kristen, will be available on our YouTube channel as well. So if you would like to, watch it later on, or share the recording with your, coworkers or your friends, etc., you can do that. As I mentioned on the beginning of our session, you can log in to our website, which is kökprojekt.com, and to register our newsletters and joining our Slack to get to know all of these webinars and these the work that we do, and you can get to know in the first hand in the first time we announce it. I would definitely encourage you to join into our Slack as well. It's a great place for be connected with the peers in this sector. So thank you so much, Kirsten, again, for joining us today. It was awesome to hear that what you guys are working on in Netherlands, and how is the future of the agri-food value chain is quite integrated with the blockchain, will be integrated with the blockchain, and the effects of it we will see in the years to come. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for everyone joining us today as well. I'll see you in our next webinar. So take care, Kirsten.
Great, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.